I really want opera to be the best that it can be. I really want the music, the singing, the audience, the marketing of it. I really want it. I want people to have an experience when they go to the opera.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. No, it's we met very spontaneously, unexpectedly.
We did. I think that's the great thing about the music world
Yeah.
is sort of how interconnected it is.
Yeah.
And you randomly run into people who you realize you're 6 degrees separated from very easily. Usually,
Yeah.
It turns into 2 degrees usually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, please introduce yourself, Jayme.
So I'm Jayme Burzette. I'm the managing director for Muse Artists International. I started my agency about 3 years ago. It was sort of born out of COVID. And so I'm very excited to have a great roster of lots of opera singers and also a conductor. I've lived in New York for 26 years now.
26 years.
So yes, I've had various music jobs in the city, which have landed me here. So yeah.
Great. So we'll get to know kind of how you came to be who you are today.
Mm-hmm.
This is Classical Chats. So gotta ask, first question, how did you get into classical music?
So it's very interesting. I wish that I could pinpoint exactly when it was, because I remember there was a movie that Luciano Pavarotti did called Yes, Giorgio. It was kind of a very cheesy 80s movie, but in it he played an opera singer. So there were scenes from Puccini's Turandot, and I just remember I must have been 9 or 10 or something, and it just was on the TV. And I think, I hadn't really been exposed to opera, and I think the concept was for a lot of people that opera was very, elite and funny and all these things. So I sort of saw that, and certainly cartoons, Bugs Bunny and all of those things, you're exposed to classical music. Yeah. So it's very interesting. There's also a pop singer from the 70s named Amy Stewart, and she sang a song called Knock on Wood. But in the middle of it, she does this, interpolated all these high notes, and I look back at that and think, that must have sparked something, because it's almost not full Queen of the Night, but it certainly was exciting in some way. And in my house, we basically listened to country music. That was kind of the music that was playing.
Now that's interesting.
So there was nobody in my family that listened to classical music.
Did they play?
They did not.
No music at all.
My sister took piano lessons and didn't practice. Sorry, sister.
Okay.
And so my mom was like, "That's it. Nobody else is getting piano lessons." Which,
Okay.
when I got to college and had to take piano proficiency, it wasn't so great. So I think there were these little pieces that were adding up to moments, and then I got into junior high, and most students were either in choir or band. So I had been singing in the choir, so I just continued with that. And we had to go around the room, the choir director, everybody had to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And that's how she was going to place you, whether you were a soprano 2, or an alto.
Wow. I thought this would be, in elementary school or something.
I was terrified. So each day I just kept moving farther back in the room, which of course they finally got to the back row. And I had to stand up, and I started to sing, and everybody turned around. And I was like mortified. And so the teacher said, "Oh, can you come down to the piano?" She said, "Sing this." She played something. Now sing this. And then she asked one of the other students to come up, and she said, "You sing this, you sing this." And then she said, "You're first chair alto." So I was like, okay, that's great. And my mom said to me, my brother wanted to take karate lessons. She said, "Do you want to take karate lessons too?" And I said, "Well, the choir director says I have a nice voice, so I'd like to take voice lessons." In hindsight, I probably should have also taken karate, but anyway, we were very, very lucky. I'm from a small town in Minnesota. Small, I think, is relative for people, because I have friends who say they're from small towns, but it's like 50,000. I also have friends who say they're from towns of 300. This town was 7,000, so it still felt small. But somehow the town attracted a certain group of high-level musicians. And, our high school library had Opera News magazine, which is just unheard of. To me, growing up, I thought that was just every library had that. Mm-hmm. And so I was very lucky that this choir director had encouraged me, and the voice teacher, the sort of best voice teacher in town, had come from South Dakota. Her father, I think, was a senator or governor or something. And she had a coloratura voice and had she was on the trajectory to have an amazing career. And then she met her husband, got married, and became a wife and a mother, and which was fine. That was a choice she made. But we were really lucky to have her because her knowledge of music was so deep, and her collection of scores. And I remember one day I went into my lesson, and under the piano there was a big chest. And I said, "What's in that chest?" And she said, "Oh, my grandmother's opera news magazines." So it was all these opera news magazines from the 40s and the 50s and 60s. So I said, "Could I borrow those?" And she said, "Yeah." And so that's when I started to read, and
it's like you had all these signs just like telling you opera.
And I went back into a lesson, and she said, "Oh, what did you learn?" I said, "Oh, this was very interesting. This about the Bayreuth Festival." And she said, "It's Bayreuth." And so that was a good lesson for me, I think, to learn to listen more than talk, because I was digesting a lot of things, and even in high school, PBS it was the Houston Grand Opera was opening their new opera house. They were doing Aida with Placido Domingo, Maria Lafreni, big event, and it was going to be on PBS. So I went over to a friend's house, and I said, "Oh, we have to watch this opera that's going to be on TV." And she said, "What is it?" And I said, "Oh, it's Aida." And of course, the announcer comes on and says, "This evening's performance of Verdi's Aida." And I looked at my friend, I said, "Oh, it's Aida." And so it was just those little things of I wasn't afraid, I think, to make some mistakes in order to gain more knowledge. So then I studied voice and went to college as a vocal performance major. That's what I was going to.
Did you know that you wanted to be a singer?
I really wanted to be a singer, and I had done competitions, and I was really encouraged, and I just loved music. I think I loved lieder more than opera, but it's what I wanted to do. But then I got to college, and I quickly learned if you don't have that piano background, which is I just did not have, it takes learning things so much longer. It really just slows the whole process down. So I think I learned pretty quickly that maybe I love music, but other people should be performing it.
Okay.
So about halfway through the year, I started as a vocal performance major. About halfway during the year, I changed to music ed. Because
I thought, to teach.
So I thought, well, I'm still in the field. I'm going to be sharing knowledge with people. That will be the thing. And randomly, I started taking dance classes at the beginning of the year.
Okay, not quite karate.
Not quite
something
karate.
Physical, though.
Yes. And so at the end of the year, the dance professor said, "You need to be a dance major. You're built like a dancer. You move like a dancer. You're going to have a great career."
Wow.
And of course, in my mind, I was like, that sounds like fun. Because again, it was, in the small town that I was from, we had a dance studio. And the woman who ran the dance studio was lovely, lovely, lovely woman. And, they would do Nutcracker and things like that every year. And so she said, "Oh, could you come and be the prince?" And I thought, oh, that's not really going to work out so well in this small town. So I just avoided it. So here was an opportunity to sort of explore. I think it's a lot like singing, actually, dance. It's that expression with your body, just a different form. And so I did that. And then
what
my junior
year, dance?
It was mostly modern dance. Because again, I thought I just didn't have the background training to do ballet. Most of the people that were dancing there who had done that had been taking ballet since they were 5, 7 years old. So I thought, oh, there could be a career in this. And again, we had a really great program at the school where they brought in orchestras and singers and these dance companies. And so we had a lot of really great dance companies come in, like Paul Taylor. And so that was a great experience because it made me sort of see how that could actually be a career. And then my junior year, I had a mental breakdown because I thought, oh, how am I going to do this thing where my whole life is dependent on an audition? And I'm going to have to live with like 11 people in a loft somewhere. And I had never been to New York. And I thought, well, if you're going to dance, you have to be in New York. So I just thought, I can't do this. So luckily, the college that I went to had different programs. They had arts management, sports management, and had music management. So basically, I got a management degree with more than a music minor, but less than a music major. So that was a good life lesson also, because what I did in college, where I thought, oh, I'm kind of pinging around, I'm doing all these things. At the end, I realized it all added up. All those experiences added up to a wholer version than if I would have just been on one track. And so I thought, that's going to be my life. Like I knew that I wasn't going to be one of these people who just got into a job and stayed there for 40 years. That didn't interest me. I wanted to collect as much information as I could. And that's basically what ended up happening. So
that's quite a journey.
Yeah.
You kind of went through different disciplines.
Yes.
And I mean, when you started saying that, your family had a lot of country music, do you find similarities?
I think, a couple of years ago, I realized that we're made of energy. And so people are going to vibrate with the frequency of music. And for whatever reason, I think I just have a lot of frequencies. I'm one of these people who can listen to most types of music, whether it's jazz or country or something. Maybe acid rock, not so much. There might be some things, or some rap, or there might be some stuff that I just don't connect to.
Yeah.
And then there are people that only it's classical music for them. They don't want to listen to other things. So I think part of that came out of the listening to country music and being exposed to that. And in fact, my grandparents were German, and so they had maybe 15 records, but it was all polka records. So it was, and I loved going, because they're all in sort of this Bavarian costumes on the cover, and so that to me was a completely different world from where I lived. And so I loved going over there and playing those records, and then eventually we'd go to weddings and I could dance the polka. So again,
yeah,
it was that.
I'm starting to see how you ended up in dance for a little bit during college.
Yeah, I think that it's that, in whatever way we sort of absorb things in the world, and then we sort of digest it and put it back in whatever way. And I think that's what the music was doing for me, and just feeling, and I think it's now what helps me connect to singers in terms of helping them in their careers to find that place where they're not just performing and just singing the music correctly and doing what everybody wants to hear, but actually figuring out why am I doing this? What's at the core of the motivation for me? Like, what gets me out of bed in the morning and makes me want to start vocalizing? What are the challenges that I see in this industry in terms of a role that I want to sing, or people that I want to sing with, or a conductor that I want to work with? And so I think that you need that sort of well-rounded environment in your life, and whether that's books that you read or movies that you watch, whatever, that contribute to your art. Because I think when you're solely focused on the music, I don't think it's not able to grow like a garden.
Oh yeah, totally. I think music is not just about the notes, and it's not, you can't get everything from just the notes. You kind of need, the different cultural experiences and language, or, reading, and you kind of have this whole 360 in a way.
There was a great recording, Anne-Sophie Mutter, the Vivaldi Four Seasons, and she had done a recording, I want to say in the 80s, with von Karajan, and then she did another one much later where she was leading the group, and this must have been 1999, roughly. And I was working at Universal all the time, and this was on Deutsche Grammophon that the CD came out, and there was a big package videos that came along with it.
I feel like I might have heard this.
And I thought it was so interesting to see the contrast of her as a young person playing this music, and now years later, you truly could hear her life experience in her playing. I mean, there was like gravitas, and there was sadness, and there was, just so many more things that, as you say, transcended the notes in the music. It was really about enveloping that music and then putting it out. So I just think that's intriguing.
Do you think your experience with music has changed from being an artist manager?
Yeah.
In what way?
So my first job in New York was at Columbia Artist Management, and I went to probably 95 opera performances that first year. And that was a struggle, because I really went from loving opera as sort of the enjoyment of listening to music and your passion for learning new things in different languages, and it became a job.
Right.
And so I really, I got out of that situation and stepped away from that aspect of the business for a long time. And now coming back to it, I've had to figure out how to divorce myself from the fact that I do what I do in terms of helping singers get work, and then going to see those performances, and to not think about all the mechanics that went into that performance happening. I just allow myself to be present and in the moment, and enjoy that artist's performance, because those are the people that I sign onto the roster. Is that there's something that when they sing, I feel a certain way, and I want larger audiences to feel that. So I get extreme joy when I'm sitting in the audience and I'll hear somebody next to me sort of gasp or say, "Oh my, that's so amazing," or "Wow," and I know that that's vibing with them, you know, and that's when I get fulfillment for sure in my job. So
interesting. And so then
I definitely listen to less music though my own.
I was about to ask, because I've talked to fellow musicians about this, and they're like, oh, don't really go to concerts because it's like, you know, a job, and reminds them of job. And so I wonder how many people actually listen to either classical music or just like enjoy music as a musician or as somebody that works in the music business, because it is, you know, your job.
I'd be curious if you talk to people, I would guess that at the beginning they listen to a lot, because there is a certain newness, and you've got to learn repertoire. And so there's also, when you're younger, you feel like there's more time. The older you get, you feel like there's less time, and so you really start to prioritize, like, what can I actually do? What do I want to do? And I find now, if I'm not going to a performance that one of my artists is doing, it's generally a non-singing concert. It'll be like the New York Philharmonic, because I get more enjoyment sometimes out of that, because it takes the element of singing away. And so I really just get to focus on, you know, sometimes I find myself listening to opera performances, and I can try and tune out the voices and really listen to the orchestra, because I think that's where it's so revealing in terms of the tempi that a conductor is going to take. Yeah. Because a singer might want to sing something a certain way, but if you said, okay, but listen to what the orchestra is playing right here, and sometimes it gets so slow that it just literally feels like the violins or some part, it's just like they're just falling off a cliff because the line is gone, because it's slowed down so much. So that I have found, as I get older, that's something that I do, is try and figure out what are all the elements to this. You know, I think great artists, opera singers, will go through full scores and really look at the parts to see. Oftentimes, it's defined which instrument is playing some of my notes, so I know where I am at a certain point. But I think it's just that knowledge of, like, what is happening underneath me while I perform. You know, I'm doing my part up here, but also every person in that pit is an element of what they're doing and performing.
Yeah, I mean, opera is really amazing because it's such a big production, so many people are involved, and when you're saying that when you go to operas, you kind of get into this analytical mode of knowing the logistics that, you know, made up an opera performance. I myself, when you were saying that you enjoy going to, for example, an orchestra concert or a non-singing concert because it's just very different from opera. For me, I have the opposite, where, you know, when I go to a piano recital or something with piano, I get into the analytical mode, and then when I go to the opera, which I do quite like going a couple times a month, it's just a very inspiring experience because it's so different from what I would know. Yeah. And so for people who don't know, you know, what goes into an opera performance making, what would you tell them?
Well, first I have a question for you. Oh, yeah. Do you go to vocal recitals as well? Because now I'm curious. This is
one thing I haven't. Do you have recommendations?
Right. Well, I'm curious because, you know, obviously Carnegie Hall with Weil Hall and Zenkel Hall have great recitals. And I think Bryn Terfel is actually at Carnegie Hall tonight. But I'm curious from your perspective, when you go to that and it's just a voice and just a piano, if you're still analyzing the piano. Because there'll be a singer there, you know, because it's like if you're just going to a piano concerto or a solo piano thing, it's such the feature. But now it can be perceived as the background.
That's true. I mean, I don't want to be mean to myself, but I can be judgy.
Yeah.
Just because I like to learn from every performance that I see, and so especially as a pianist, looking at a pianist, even if they are collaborative pianist and not the soloist, I would still be, you know, wondering why are they touching the keys this way, why are they playing like this. So I guess analytic mind is still there, but I will say I enjoy listening. So I haven't been to a vocal recital, I'm sorry, but that was on my mind when I was looking at Carnegie calendar like last season. I was like, darn, I would have liked to go to that one. But I do enjoy listening to Schumann's Dichter Liebe, and I don't really actually pay so much attention to the piano. So
it is interesting because I think one of the things that I've noticed that's happening now in our industry is that pianists they almost take a passive role in a recital situation where they're like, oh, I'm just here backing up the singer. And there are a lot of times when I think you're the orchestra. When you're playing something, you're the orchestra on the keyboard right now, and absolutely you should be playing that. There'll be moments where you'll want to maybe bring it down so you're not covering the singer. There was a great video, I feel like it was maybe a year ago, Renee Fleming did a series of recitals with Eugene Kissin.
Yeah,
And,
that was what I wanted to see, and I was
and
like,
there
no
was
way
a
I could get
video,
in.
somebody had sort of, a pirate video somebody had taken from the audience, and there was just a clip, and he was just playing the music. And I thought, this is I want all pianists to see this who work with singers, because you're part of that performance.
Yeah.
And the excitement that you generate from the keyboard also excites the artist, and then the audience starts to feel that excitement. If it starts to feel apologetic, we start to feel that, and then we want to shy away as well.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's really transparent, the energy that you put on stage, whether you have a smaller role and not the soloist, or as a soloist. It's really transparent. Yeah, sometimes I've seen performances where exactly what you're saying, that they don't seem to be as involved maybe as the soloist, if I'm being super honest.
Well, I definitely want to say, play out. Feel free to play. And that's when I wish that I did play piano, because when you're sitting in the audience and you can sort of feel that energy, and you just want to transfer it into the piano and get that music out, because there's so much glorious music, and there are moments that can be really transcendent if it's all together.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this last time, something about the skill of being able to play as you sing.
Yes.
Right, to prepare for an opera performance. Walk me through how it goes. So upstairs neighbor for 4 years during high school was an opera singer.
Okay.
But here's the thing. I'm so sorry. I don't think he will ever watch this episode, but he kept saying the same thing, and my mother and I were wondering if he was a backup singer in the Met or something, because we would just hear the same leap a couple times, like, I don't know, half an hour, and we would hear like an orchestra track, something like this.
Yeah.
And so we had this theory that maybe he is like the backup singer, or like in the
or like in a chorus.
Group. In a chorus or something.
I do think that there are some singers that will focus on something that they might see as a deficiency, whether that's, I don't have a good trill, or a certain high note.
Whatever reason, it was always that one leap.
Right, and that is... that's where sort of, I don't know if you ever experienced like stage fright or anxiety when you were playing, that it's almost crippling in a way. And some singers, I think, have that about very specific things. So for instance, that singer, it might be a certain interval, or it might be a certain note that's at the top of what he was doing. And the truth is, no matter if he sang it 100 times, it still isn't going to fix. The idea might be in his head more than it is actually in his voice when he's producing it. But it makes him feel better maybe to do that thing.
Well, yeah, it's always like a good security precaution to.
Did you have that playing piano in terms of like there was always specific passages that you would practice over and over and over, versus doing the whole piece, rehearsing the whole piece, that there were sections that you always went back to and would spend almost as much time on that as you did the whole piece in the overall period?
As much as I say that I analyze other people's performances, I don't know if I analyze my own way of practicing. I think I'm not quite the driller, if that's a word. Yeah. I think I like to play the piece from start to finish pretty much. That's majority of my practicing is just running through the pieces and kind of getting the overall story. And then when I'm washing dishes or cooking, I will have some snippet play in my head, and then I'll be like, okay, that's interesting. I have a different phrasing idea, or maybe, this line connects with that line, and then I'll get into little details, and maybe I will then go and look at that next time I practice. But I don't know if I play something over and over again so obsessively, unless it's a purely technical situation.
Right. Do you find also that the access that we have to music now, I mean, with YouTube and Spotify and everything, it used to be, you had to go to a music store to buy a recording, then you get home.
Remember when Tower Records was here?
And Virgin Megastore and HMV,
HMV was my toy store as a child.
Yeah.
I had like stacks of CDs, and you could listen and try.
So I do wonder, in terms of, your perspective, I think because voices are so unique to the individual that almost every interpretation is different, just because it can be because of the sound of their voice. But I'm curious, I do find myself, if I go to like YouTube and I like a piano piece, I will go and then just kind of play drop the needle and listen to 20 different people. And it's terrible to say this, but I know almost immediately, like when I hear 20 in a row, and just say, well, that's the one. That's the one that's, not to say it's right, but it's
just instinctive. Like, it's just like, I get you, it makes sense.
Yeah. And then I feel bad, because I think, well, I mean, I'm sure that then somebody else would say, oh, I liked the first one.
Yeah.
So there's something for everybody, but I wonder if there's something to the fact that we can be so dismissive almost about a performance. Even of the great pianists, I can say, well, that was a nice try, but this one is so much better. You know, and that's not really fair because, you know, they're 30 years apart. And this person has had the advantage of listening to the other person's interpretation, so they can copy it or change it or do with it what they want to. I do wonder that about music, if you feel like it's, not to say it's more disposable now, that people don't maybe treasure it as much, because again, you used to have to go to a performance if you wanted music. And then when we had recorded music, then you could buy it and bring it into your home, or, you know, I guess people had pianos at home so they could have music that way. But it's so much more accessible now, and I wonder if it feels too disposable in a way, like we don't value it as much as maybe we should. Although I will say that when I go to a live performance,
I was about to ask, do you treasure live performances more?
Because I think there are disappointments, because you'll have favorite parts of a symphony and you'll just be anticipating it, thinking, here this comes up I really love, and it just doesn't go quite how you love it. And so that's a little bit disappointing. But sometimes there are these really beautiful surprises that just wash over you like a wave in an ocean, and you're so overwhelmed with the beauty of the idea that this came out of somebody. Like somebody wrote this down on paper, and these musicians all studied and have performed to come together to just create this one moment which just happens. It's so magical. And I love that I can go back to recordings and it's the same thing. If I love something, it's the same thing every time I put it on. But there is something to the spontaneity of a live performance that is really, you can't capture it. And I think that was one of the things that happened with COVID, is we haven't figured out how to get people back into the concert hall, because I think
we were talking about this.
Yeah, I think people got very comfortable at home. I think no matter what your profession is, it got very easy to sort of, watch Netflix and be at home and do those things. And the truth is, the first time I went back into an opera house and heard a performance, I thought, oh, right, that's what you can't get from, a recording or the TV or a computer. And you have to experience it live. And when you do, it's quite addictive. Because it's almost like these endorphins, and it's a charge that when you see a really great performance, that's what spurs on the next 10 that you see, because they might not all be great, but you're waiting for that next one again, where you have that kind of rush of, oh, it's incredible. And it can be overwhelming when you think about the amount of music that's out there. Like when you think, even just Mozart, look at all the music Mozart wrote. It's hard to wrap your mind around it all, let alone every composer for hundreds of years,
So then how do we get people back into the concert hall? That's
a good question. I'm watching the development. People have different ideas about, how to access young people, how to get them involved. And I went to an opera recently in Washington, D.C., and it was a matinee. So, the majority of the audience was at least 60 or older. And I found myself looking around thinking, when did you get into opera? You're attending this opera now. Did you start going 20 years ago? Did you start going 40 years ago? 50 years? And how did you get into it that you went? But then you went so far as to become a subscriber and maybe a donor, and now you're showing up. And this was a new Janine Tesori opera, contemporary piece. And that's challenging. It's challenging to sit through something that's just not melodic and beautiful. It really takes discipline. And so I was just so intrigued that this audience had that. And that's what I wonder, how we're getting the next generation into that. Because a lot of these people did grow up taking piano lessons. Everybody used to have a piano in their house, and they would take piano lessons. Some people would take violin lessons, some would take voice lessons. And so they had music from a younger age. And certainly in elementary school, we had Mrs. Holt had an upright piano that was on wheels, and she just wheeled it from classroom to classroom. And we would sing songs, play recorders, and it was cute. It was the kind of thing that it clearly made an impression on me, because then so it's those sorts of things that I truly believe get people into opera. Like there was a comedian the other night at Carnegie Hall who he trained to be a singer, but Matteo Lane is his name, and he's a very famous comedian now. But he brought Nadine Sierra, this opera singer, out on stage, and they sang together. And it was this moment that I thought, I could see people in the industry thinking, oh, that's very cheesy. What are you doing? But then I thought, how many people are sitting, if you've got, 2,500 people sitting there who came to see a comedy show, and suddenly Nadine Sierra walks out and sings this opera, that can really pique somebody's interest and get them to maybe go to an opera once or buy a recording or something. So it's hard because we tend to curate things. We want things to be a certain way. And the truth is, if we didn't have those moments or music in a movie, like people all the time, I hear people say, oh, I don't like classical music. And I say, did you get married? Because what you walked down the aisle to is Wagner, and that is from Lohengrin, that is opera. So I think for me, I've always said it's about entertainment and education. And so, especially in this country, I don't know how we're going to get back to the point where we really value any sort of exposure to the arts when people are young to just help develop their brains. Even if they're not going to be a concert pianist or a violinist or whatever the case might be, it's helping them develop. And then as they grow older, they do have an appreciation for the arts. So say that somebody's become an engineer, they might become a subscriber to the New York Philharmonic or the Metropolitan Opera because they enjoy it. And it's such a, not a release from their job, but it's a
kind of a
it's
break.
Complementary. It's a break, because they're so focused on one thing that this is so different to them, and it just allows them to escape for a moment. So anyway, to answer your question, I see a lot of orchestras now trying to do what maybe Broadway shows do. So they'll say, oh, you can bring drinks into the auditorium now. So
is that a thing now?
Yes, and so what they'll do is they'll say, they'll have their own special cups with
So it's like the movies.
lids. It's like the movies. The thing I don't like about that is that I'm sitting in a performance and I hear people kick cups over, and that's very distracting, or somebody's drinking next to you. But then I think that's maybe bringing somebody in because they're saying, well, I can go to the movie and I can go to this sports event, or I can go to a Broadway show and I can, have a drink of soda, wine, whatever the thing is. Why can't I do that at the opera? Mm-hmm. And there's, the purist in me says, well, part of, during the pandemic, there was one point I was watching a Mozart Mass in C performance on the computer, and I realized I had Netflix on and I was on my phone, and I wasn't even paying attention to that. And I realized one of the things I missed most about going to a performance was the discipline of walking into a place, sitting down, the lights go down, and you have to focus on what's on stage. You can't, you could escape, you could just get up and leave, but for the most part, you just have to sit and focus. You can't be distracted by anything. I saw a person in the audience pull out their phone, and they were scrolling on the phone, and it was annoying because it was bright, and so it was there was no way for me not to see it. And I thought, what's a person going through that they're not present in this moment to see this performance? Because if you're on your phone, that means your attention is somewhere else. So then why not leave? And so I also don't want to get into a situation where it becomes too casual in the audience, where people then, because people,
it's always, a question of finding the balance, because I don't know if you heard this, but BBC made an app for reading during the concert. And back in 2019. It's a very strange idea, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I like you though, BBC. Just maybe I don't know about your app, but the idea was that you use their app during the concert on your phone to go through like the play-by-play of like what's going on in the music. Kind of a strange idea, but you mentioned discipline a couple times. Yeah. And as a devil's advocate, or just as somebody who might think, oh, classical music is so serious and you have these rules that you're supposed to kind of follow, but they're kind of unspoken, but you feel the pressure of like, oh, when to clap or when to do something or when to not move. Do you think it's necessary, discipline? Or how would you explain that need for,
it's interesting.
Because, like focused attention?
I think it's maybe strange, but I think about the compression that creates a diamond. And there is part of me that believes that you have to have that intense, uncomfortable pressure, which is studying and practicing. And in order to be able to, if a singer has not learned a piece of music to give a recital, if they haven't memorized the music and ingested it and lived with it for, say 6 months before they're performing it, how are they able to give it to me?
Hey, it just occurred to me. Do all singers memorize their music?
It depends on the performance. So if it's a very contemporary piece, like a Ligeti piece or something like that, they could tend to use music. If it's say like a Mozart Requiem, a Fauré Requiem, or Verdi Requiem, oftentimes it's in Latin or something, and so their scores are used. Handel's Messiah, you'll most often see singers with that. Everything else is generally memorized.
That's
and I think you
interesting.
need to, I'm amazed at pianists. I have to say, maybe because I'm not a pianist, it seems much harder to me. But when you're a singer, you're singing it and you have the advantage of words and music to help kind of stick together in your brain. And that helps you learn. I always think of piano music, I'm like, it's just all notes. And like how I look at some pieces and I just think, how do you memorize that?
Honestly,
full
I don't know.
concertos or recitals and things. And I think, how do you even go about doing that? Because again, singers have words, and the
Yeah,
words
I guess
of music.
words are easier to remember. Like the
yeah.
story, there's kind of more to attach to it. I honestly don't know how music gets glued to my
It's for
head
me, it's like
sometimes.
Shakespeare. I look at pianists like Shakespeare. It feels overwhelming to me, but obviously people study Shakespeare and perform it. They're able to memorize Shakespeare and do it. I have no idea how they do it.
But actually, it's interesting. I asked about the memorizing because you were saying that a singer has to prepare and
So
really
recitals.
memorize and really absorb so that you can be fully in the character and not be reading a script or something.
Yes, yeah.
And I just had a thought, like I've seen violin recitals or cello recitals where they don't necessarily have to memorize this as the soloist. And I guess maybe the expectation is higher for singers because it's so like a human telling you a story, and it's so much more convincing maybe. I don't know, just hypothesis.
For me, that's why my preference is to have it memorized. Because if you come out and you have a music stand in front of you and there's a score on it, that's already between me and you, the performer. Already there's a block. So how am I able to receive your story? Because you're behind this wall almost. Because also I think you need to memorize something and then really start to sing it for yourself.
I feel that with playing as a pianist also, that once I've memorized it, I can then
you can you can really start to wonder, well, what did the composer want here? Like, why is this written this way? And oftentimes that's hard to do when you're learning it. I think once you've learned it and digested it, then you're able to have that great expression. And then I love watching singers over long periods of time maybe sing a certain piece of music over and over that's in their repertoire, and to see then how that changes over time because they start to discover more about themselves, about the music and those kinds of things. But again, certainly in operas also they memorize, even contemporary things, because there's the acting aspect. But
preparation for an opera.
Yeah.
What happens? You're saying that when you watch an opera performance, you kind of know all the logistics that came to be.
Yeah.
I am very much, just an onlooker. I love to kind of think about the storyline and also the singing and the expression with their bodies and all the different elements that make me kind of think a little bit outside of the, black and white keys.
Yeah. I definitely think that could actually help bring more people to opera if they knew more about the process and really what it takes. Because people think, oh, opera's very expensive, and I'm like, if you knew everything that was in the background to be able to put an opera, I mean, all the supers and the electricians and the staff of the opera house and the directors and the stage directors and the musicians, the costumers, just everything. It's actually shocking that we're able to do opera. Yeah. Because it really, there's so much that goes into it.
Huge production. But can you actually walk me through, just as artist management, you probably know from start to finish?
Yeah. So I think it's different for different operas, different people. Because if it's a new piece of music and it's a very difficult piece of music, a singer could maybe a year before the performance start to learn it and sort of digest it. Yeah. If it's certainly something they can pick up easily, like I have a singer who's at the Met right now who jumped into a role and literally in 3 days was learning it and doing the staging at the same time. Yeah. And so for some people, again, that's discipline. She had laid the groundwork in order to be able to do that. So I think it depends on the piece. If it's something that it's music that rhythmically or something that they can pick up easily.
Mm-hmm.
Some will start like six months before. Some 3 months. It depends on the piece. You can delve into it and really absorb it, memorize it,
right.
To the point of then, as you show up on the first day, typically what happens is the entire cast is there, and you'll have the music director, the conductor.
How far in advance before the performance?
Also depends.
Yeah,
There are opera companies that will have sometimes 3 months before they'll start that process, and it's a very long process. Some companies it's 3 weeks. They'll go in and
that's still,
literally.
It
feels like a long time, but
well, I mean,
but
just
when you're
compared to like, for example, touring soloists who play concertos, for example,
Yes.
it's like 2 days before,
yeah,
and then it's like boom, which is
but they've
so
already
much shorter.
each of those performers has learned on their own, right? I mean, they've learned their parts.
Yeah.
So when you come
yeah.
together, you're like, well, we can in 2 days we can figure out like how we gel and then
Well,
go.
it depends on the orchestra. I've
Right.
played with some that are literally sight reading 2 days before.
Oh yeah.
But no,
Which
but
is also
which
difficult if you are at a high level and you have the ability to do that. I think
Yeah.
it can hinder you.
Yeah.
Because then you will just put things off because
Yeah.
you're able to walk in and just sight read it and still get away with it.
Yeah, getting away is quite like a badge of honor. I've heard. Like,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I only spent like
Yeah.
two hours before, and I did it. Like,
Yeah.
respect to music is my opinion. But
So some
like
opera
3
companies,
weeks
yeah. So some
or 3
opera
months.
companies also will start with music. So they'll maybe sing through the whole opera with the whole cast, and then they'll break it down and start having music rehearsals, and then they'll start the staging after they feel like they've gone through the whole piece
So music
and
comes
broken it down.
first?
Yeah, some will start with the staging, like the opera the singer jumped into. They started on day one with staging, and again, that's why you have to be prepared. When you
Yeah.
show up, you have to know the music. You have to be very open to direction so that you can start retaining that in a quick manner. So.
Concertos, it's kind of everything is pretty much set, but like staging and the designs and costumes and so many more variables in an opera performance. So it's amazing how your artist could learn all of that in like 3 days.
Yeah, some directors have very specific ideas about each character and about the overall way the opera should look, and they're very specific about it, and they will keep working with the singer until they get exactly what they want out of it. There are other directors who are much more free form, and if they detect that a singer is maybe a good actor instinctively, they might just give them the boundary, the periphery of like, well, here's kind of what I want, and let them do it on their own.
And just to be clear, this is the
stage director,
not
Yes.
the
Not the conductor,
Because
right,
how many
right.
There are like multiple directors, no? In like an
well,
opera
the stage
production.
director and the conductor.
And the conductor, yeah.
So and it's interesting because sometimes there will be disagreements because a stage director might want a certain thing, and it just logistically can't happen with what's going on in the orchestra pit with the music, and so then a conductor might have to say, we can't do that right there. I think the best in the field are able to negotiate and sort of pivot and do that sort of thing. I think if you talk to any singer, they would tell you their experiences with some stage directors have either they've been elated by the process or really discouraged by the process. Because
actually, I never even thought that there could be disagreements between the stage director and the conducting.
Or sometimes, a costume design will want a certain thing, but then the stage director wants them to jump out a window or do a thing that logistically they can't do with the costume. Like the costume will get caught on something, or they can't do a costume change quickly or something.
But the costume design, the set designs are before the rehearsals.
Yes.
So
yes.
Somehow
and
all
so
of that
sometimes you
has
don't
to
know.
melt together.
Yes, sometimes you don't know until you're actually in the process. I mean, you could even go through all the rehearsals and then suddenly you're in a performance and there's something that nobody thought of and it just happens, which is, of course, is this spontaneity of live theater, which is why we love it. But you certainly don't want to see somebody slide down a set and get hurt. But that kind of stuff happens, which reminds you that you're watching live performance. And again, I think that's what makes it exciting. Because you want the singer to hit the high note. You want the singer to have their moment on the stage and do whatever. So, yeah.
So then this goes on for...
So it could go on for 3 weeks, depending. I would say like a lot of sort of A- B+ houses in America, the whole production process is about a month.
Okay.
They can do, like 3 weeks of staging, then they get into tech, where they're bringing in all the lighting and sound and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll have, a final tech, a final dress, and then performances start.
How many rehearsals
and
during
they'll do
that?
like 3 or 4 or so. Again, it depends on the size of the piece, but also the size of the cast. Because some operas can have 3 people. Some of them can have
Like children,
a huge like the La Boheme at the Met. It's 200 people on the stage. So that's to sort of coordinate that. I mean, luckily they've done the production so many times. It's a Zeffirelli production. So the staging is one thing, and most of those chorus members have done that production over and over and over, so they know it. They don't have to go through that process. There was an opera at Houston Grand Opera called The Wreckers, an Ethel Smythe opera, and they had at the end there was like a cannon of water that was sort of the waves splashing or whatever, but it was just giant thing, and it's just, I mean, that alone needed its own rehearsal time in order to make sure that it would go off without hitch and nobody was hurt and whatever. It was a fantastic effect when it was done, but again, you have to budget. I mean, I have to say it's something I could not do, like people that are in charge of rehearsal schedules at opera companies and putting all those pieces together. For me, it's like math and science.
Yeah.
And I am much more creative. I like the larger picture type thing. When I get into the details of all that stuff, I just get like, I don't want to do this.
Okay, so we now know that you don't get up every day to be like the nitty gritty artist manager.
It's always about the arc. For me, it's about the arc of a singer's career. It's not about the day-to-day jobs. Like what's going to be the job today. It's sort of like, where do we want to go? How do we want to develop you? Where are the places we want you to be? And is that coming in the right time? And of course, all that shifts because we have a problem in the country right now that there are opera companies that are closing. Some are doing less productions. Yeah. And if an opera company only does 4 productions a year and they take one away, that's a lot of jobs. It's a lot of jobs for musicians and singers and costumers. It's a big hit. So yeah, we need to sort of bolster, and we need, Europe is able to operate because they have state funding. And so it's interesting to go to see their performances because one night it could be this really avant-garde, it's really out there opera. And if people don't like it, it doesn't matter because they come the next night and there's another opera. And it's very affordable for them because they do have state funding. It's almost like the audience is allowed to have experimentation. And here I feel like we don't do that because it can be expensive. And so you sort of have to think, well, where do I want to make the investment? Maybe I'll just go to 4 operas this year. I'll pick out the operas, and then, of course, that being said, the Metropolitan Opera does have rush tickets sometimes the day of, right? I mean, yeah, exactly.
I love it. That's the only reason that I can go so many times to the opera is because of that.
I went a couple months ago, and I thought, I really want to see this opera, and I just went online and bought a $35 ticket in the balcony. And I'll tell you, it's some of the best sound in the opera house in terms of the singers. And the truth is, it's 3,700 seats. Even when you're up in the balcony, you're still feel close enough to the stage that you see the singers, and it doesn't feel like they're just specks on the stage. When the whole thing was done, I just thought, that's incredible that I just got this experience for $35. Do you ever do one of these like under 40 event type things where they're like, it's like a social,
bit strange
to
me.
Right. So I think,
but maybe I'm just like too
they're
old
trying.
soul.
Yeah,
I see
they're
the
trying.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, okay, well, it gets some people in, and it's kind of a thing, and especially now that they can have like Instagram and things. But do we need more? And what do
you think is the future of opera?
Well, the good news is, like with any music, opera is going to be around for a long time. Since it was created, because again, it's just that vibration. There are going to be people, there will always be people who hate opera. They just don't like it. There's always going to be somebody who loves it. There's going to be somebody who's in a movie, they're watching a TV show, and a commercial comes on, and it's the duet from Lakme, and everyone knows it, and they say, I love that music. That's a gateway, because once you sort of know that, it gets you in. You go to Turandot at the Met. As soon as the tenor starts singing Nessun Dorma, you can feel 80% of the audience is like, I know this. So there's that sense of, right, you've heard this piece of music before, and now you're seeing it in the context of the opera. And that excites them.
Yeah.
So I think if we can figure out how to just generate enough of excitement rather than trying to have this grand movement of, we have to overhaul the education system in America. No, I think if we create special programs where people can have little bits of access to things to just get a little knowledge and grab onto certain, that's what I love melodies in operas, because that's the thing people can grab onto. And once they get there, it's what leads them to the next thing and the next thing. And before you know it, I had a professor in college, really great music voice teacher. And he introduced me to a lot of operas. And I remember one day he said, "Oh, you've got to hear this thing." And he put the record on and played the thing. It was, 17 minutes later, he's like, "What'd you think?" And I said, "Well, it was really loud." And of course, it was Salome, Strauss's Salome. And it was the closing scene. And I just wasn't ready to receive it, and now it's one of my favorite pieces of music. So that, again, also was a lesson for me that everybody needs to be brought in at their time. You can't just say, well, here's the thing, and then it just one size fits all for everybody. It's a little bit more like a slow drip, and how you introduce people. I'll tell you, because again, I don't listen to a lot of instrumental music, but I'm constantly surprised when a clip will appear of a piano piece or something, and I just think, how did I not know this piece? It'll be so overwhelmingly beautiful and intense, like Shostakovich Piano Concerto No. 2. It's one of those pieces that you just think, this is one of the most beautiful melodies ever written. Like, it's incredible, and there's just no way somebody could hate that music. It's just so intense, and that's the sort of thing then you want to share that with people.
Have you ever tried to get somebody interested?
I had friends on my Facebook were really not having because I posted a lot of opera things, and they just didn't like that. And so I thought, I need a place to put this. So I created a blog. I didn't want it to be like a gossipy opera blog. If I would go to a movie and I would see something from opera in it, I would just do a post and say, this film is this, and this is the scene, and this is what the piece of music is, and here's where you can hear the whole thing. There was so much on a daily basis that was in my orbit that I was experiencing like just as a layperson, that I thought I just need a place to put all of this stuff. It got a lot of traffic. I didn't monetize it because I wanted to be able to, just use images off the internet and not have to worry about copyright and things like that. But it got millions of views and traffic. But I thought, this is the kind of thing I could see somebody stumbling upon. Like if they were going to Google something, that randomly this might come up as a result if the clip of music was in there, and that might be sort of a gateway into them just exploring more of the page. I had a friend in high school who took voice lessons from the same teacher I did. She was 3 years older than me, and I went to her senior high school recital, and she sang a bunch of things, and then after she said, what did you like, what didn't you like? And I said, well, I liked this one piece and I didn't really like that. Well, it was both. It was Musette's aria and Mimi's aria from La Bohème, both, which is two different characters. But she sang them both. And so then we went, so the closest sort of city to where I lived was Fargo, North Dakota, because they had a mall. Anyway, they had a music store there. And so I said, what was that opera that you sang those things from? And she said, La Bohème. And so I got one cassette that was La Bohème highlights of the opera, and another one was called Puccini Weekend. And I said, which one should I get? She said, get Puccini Weekend, because that has more singers and more operas on it, so you'll learn more things, whatever. So I got that. But that was kind of my gateway in, because then I started learning, Franco Corelli and Renata Tebaldi. I learned all these singers, and then all these other Puccini operas, which were beyond La Bohème, and that really started me collecting, because I'm a really inquisitive person. And so then I started to say, oh, okay, well, what about this opera? Who else sang that opera? Who are these singers? And learning the background of that. And again, when you're younger, there's just time. You don't have responsibilities, and your parents are taking care of the place to live and feeding you. So it really does give you that time. But I also remember, I don't know if you ever had, Columbia House had like a music where it was like, you paid a penny and got 10 CDs, and then you were in this club and they would send you like a postcard and you had to write on there like, I don't want the CD, and if you didn't, then they send it to you, and then most people would have to buy the CD. It was kind of a scam, but most people would join the club to get a lot of like free CDs and stuff.
Okay.
And I had done this, and one of the CDs was a Barbra Streisand CD. And it's so interesting now that she's written her memoirs, and so she's being interviewed in a lot of places. And she was asked a question about, what brings her joy. And she said, knowing that when I'm singing something and it really affects somebody, like in their life somehow, like they really connect to that, that's what brings her joy. And immediately I was like, I just thought to, being 15 years old and listening to this CD and her singing Memories from Cats, and just how penetrating that was. And that's what made me realize, like, that's the effect that music has on people. It just really just drills into you and can just grab you in a way that nothing else does. I'm focused on opera and classical music now, but I love all genres of music. So what happens is, I think your own life experiences with whatever's going on in your life, that comes out in your voice. And I think that's what people feel in an audience. When a great singer is singing something, you're almost feeling all of their life experiences are also coming in that music. And I think that makes a great artist. I think somebody who has not a well-rounded life, it's not whatever, I guess you would say it was boring. The performance, it just doesn't do anything for me. To me, I think that comes out of discipline. I think when I feel that from somebody, it really is, this person has really put the effort into this to really, really learn it. They're feeling it in a way that I'm now feeling it, which is exciting. I've heard a lot of performances though where somebody will sing something and I think, well, you've sung that correctly. You sang all the notes on the page that were written, and you sang all the notes in tune, but I didn't feel anything from that. And I think that is a crime in some ways. The fact that somebody would spend so much of their life, studying music and voice lessons and coachings and hours and hours and hours to give basically a sterile performance. Like that can't be satisfying for them. I think
that's what's interesting, because you bring up discipline, and I do think discipline is very important, but I think a lot of people might misinterpret or just think that discipline is the opposite of emotions and experiencing life, and it sounds very square and very rigid. And if you hear that though, then in somebody's singing or in somebody's music playing, then it's actually not what you're looking for in a music performance.
Correct. So I think we probably need a new word for discipline. It's probably like framework or something, because that's really what it is. You're just activating within the framework of a schedule. That's what it is. I think discipline has this like harsh, like there's a way, right? Exactly. Like it's awful. Probably a lot of people would say, oh yeah, my mom made me take piano lessons and stood over saying, you will practice. Yeah. So I think there's this association where they think of that as discipline.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's that. I think it's just sort of saying, here's what I need to do. In order to perform, I need to memorize this text. I need to learn these notes. I need to creatively figure out how I want the audience to experience this. I need to do all of those things so that by the time I'm there on that first day, this can all happen. And if you don't have that, I think it's very unfair to colleagues that do put that effort in, to just show up and not be as prepared as they are, because that also then takes away from their own performances. And then it affects the dynamic, and then it's just, because it's such a teamwork. Yeah, and also discipline can be fun. It can be rewarding. I mean, the truth is, if you wanted a great body, you can't wish it into being. You have to get up. You have to go to the gym. You have to work out. You have to eat right. I mean, that's discipline. Yeah. If you want the end product, and if you don't want that, that's also okay. But I always find it interesting that, you can think of so many people who would go to the gym and have that discipline, seriously what you're describing, but it doesn't have that negative connotation of being whipped. Right. Whereas, unfortunately, I've heard so many stories of people with music teachers or parents who force them and was very mean to them, and have this sour understanding of discipline. I definitely have seen videos. It's interesting. It's piano teachers and ballet teachers are the ones that I see. I don't want people to be mean to people, but I think being strict and pushing somebody can be good. So it's finding the balance of definitely. Because if I saw you and said, you're a great motivational speaker, but you had no desire, or you weren't doing anything that you weren't getting in front of any crowds to give you the experience to then be in front of a stadium to do it, then somebody would push you and say, you've got to do these things and these things. And it doesn't feel great, but at the end, when you achieve the thing, that's when it feels great. And you're grateful somebody did push you in that way. Yeah. But it's especially in our world now, it's a sort of fine line of what is too much.
Yeah.
And also there's a lot of things that I think you can't say that people used to say. You idiot, what are you doing? You can't really do that anymore.
Even stronger language. But
yeah.
They only yell at you because they care or something like this.
Yeah.
But not encouraging that at all.
I mean, this is where psychology comes in, and maybe it's trying to find a better way to express to the student or the person learning what their motivation is. And to say, if you play this scale 800 times in a row, whatever, then it will be easy for you. If you don't practice that in that way, it is always going to be difficult for you. You will break at some point and you will give up.
Motivation. What's your motivation to do what
I think
you're
my
doing?
motivation is I really want opera to be the best that it can be. I really want the music, the singing, the audience, the marketing of it. I really want it. I want people to have an experience when they go to the opera. It doesn't happen a lot. From my perspective, as somebody who's maybe not a singer and whatever, going to those performances, you might feel elated by them. I think, again, because I know more of the background of what goes into the production, or also having this standard. I mean, this is the other thing of having over 100 years of recorded music available, is that I know what's possible from a singer, and when people don't live up to that sometimes, and they're given platforms that maybe they aren't ready for or non-deserving, whatever the thing is, that's so disappointing to me. Mm-hmm. Because I think we're not helping our industry. You want people to have those great experiences. That's what keeps me going back to an opera or a concert. I mean, I'll tell you, I saw Kelly Clarkson in concert. I saw Pink in concert. I mean, these were incredible experiences, and that's what made me want to go back, is because I felt you feel almost extra alive. Yeah. When something's really great. And those people are, Adele is one of those people who she is at the peak, the pinnacle of greatness in her art. And that's what opera should be too. I mean, when it's really all together, it's exhilarating and it's almost overwhelming. I mean, imagine when you go and you think this person is singing unamplified in this giant space over an orchestra. It's like superhuman almost. It's incredible. Mm-hmm. So my motivation is to try and keep singers as healthy as possible so they can have long careers, and to make sure that they find these great opportunities, pieces of music that they want to sing that brings their point of view, getting to work with certain other musicians, chamber groups, pianists, orchestras, whatever that is, that really allows them to have a voice. I don't know any other way to say that, in terms of their perspective of mm-hmm. art and culture and poetry and life. And I don't know. And I do, it's funny, I was struggling just today thinking, what's my role in all of this in terms of
and that's basically my question to you. Yeah.
In terms of like the longevity of opera. Like I always say, we have to go back to the elementary schools. It really has to start there. But I think I'm not doing that. If I'm somebody who's passionate about this art form and working with these singers, how do I get to sort of a grassroots level to even be working with one program that's helping students of all backgrounds just get a speck of interest in music? Again, they might not go into that as a career, but at least there's a spark of interest that in whatever way that forms, it's out there in the world. Yep. And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, Riccardo Muti used to go to, I think around Chicago, there was a prison that he would go to with Joyce DiDonato and Eric Owens, and they would do performances with the prisoners. And I just thought, how therapeutic that must have been to be able to have people who are incarcerated in this terrible situation, whatever was going on in their lives that they ended up there, to have these artists come in and share this music with them. You know what I mean? It just, I was going to say it's like a ray of hope or something, but whatever, however that goes into them and then manifests and changes them in some way, or that they bring a different perspective of things. That's the kind of thing that I'm hopeful, if I'm not able to do some sort of thing, that there are people out there. And this is why I'm a huge advocate of so many people are trained in music, but they're always told, you're going to be a concert pianist, you're going to be an opera singer. And they push and push and push, and they go through conservatory, they go to young artist programs, they do all these things. And I encourage singers all the time, look at all the jobs that are out there. Yes, you've studied to be a singer, but that means you now have a knowledge of opera and singing. You'd be a great artistic administrator or a development officer, because you're able to, a lot of these donors want to know more about opera. You're able to talk to them about that and engage them. So I think the more that we're encouraging people to not look at that as failing by saying, oh, I didn't become a concert pianist, but look at the ways that you're affecting the world in so many other ways than maybe you could have done as a pianist. And I hope that message gets out there. And so I do think there is going to be somebody, it's probably not going to be me, but that will spark, that finds that motivation to be sort of the grassroots and figure out how to have programs in schools and make music important. Because again, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, if everybody had a piano in their house and they were taking piano lessons, we don't have that anymore. And now kids are on their phones all the time, and they're on TikTok and they're on Instagram and things like that, which are, it's fine in small doses, I'm sure. But then if you don't have those other disciplines in terms of music and reading and that sort of things, how are we developing as humans, as a society? So I'm hopeful that something will come along. I always think of Leonard Bernstein when he did the concerts
great.
At the New York Phil,
oh
and
my
it
gosh.
was and engaging those kids.
Young people's concerts. So great.
Yes, and there might have been people in the classical music world that were just like, how dare you do these carpet concerts with these kids? This is ridiculous. But that created a whole generation of music lovers. Yeah. So I think those people are out there. I think that there is that motivating factor. It's not mine completely 100%. I'm interested in that development, but yeah. So I hope that's out there, because in some ways I think we're going to have to be starved as a society. Like, we're going to get to a point where people say it's enough Instagram, it's enough TikTok,
I know,
it's enough
we always
Facebook.
have to get to the
right,
most extreme.
Completely oversaturated. That you step back and say, okay, what have I learned from looking at all of this? How am I a better person? What am I doing out in the world from all of this that I've just looked at? So I think we'll take a step back and say, all right, well, that's there if I want it, because I think it could be an effective marketing tool for classical music organizations. But I think we have to get to this point where it's just not dire straits, but we really look back to music to guide us as a society and realize how important it is in all realms. Because I don't know, it's funny, when I worked for this internet company, all of the producers from the different genres would ask various questions, and we wanted to do a segment that we submitted certain questions that they asked everybody. And one of them was, who's your biggest musical influence? And you know what? 90% of the people said, no matter what genre they were from, Julie Andrews. And I thought that was really interesting, because of course a lot of people saw The Sound of Music. It was just on their TV, whatever. And I thought, who would ever think that these people, these pop or rock singers or whatever, would say Julie Andrews was their influence and why they got into music and she's so revered. So I think, I think we'll have stuff like that in the world that will continue to generate that interest and certainly spark something that keeps it alive.
That is the hope of my charity, To Give Classical, and just having people like you share your stories. That's so different from, I think the general impression of classical music being very, distant and kind of hard to understand, and you have all these people that don't really talk about what they do, and so it was very refreshing to meet you as an artist manager, as part of the so-called establishment, to just talk about your
and I tell
your
people
life with music.
I tell people all the time, I consider myself a layperson of opera. Like, I'm really the novice. I don't know every opera and every character and every, the range of every role. I certainly try and learn as much as I can, but I want to be that bridge between maybe sort of the elite and people who've never heard opera. I'm that guy who, I do like hearing things in movies and the curiosity of like, oh, what is that, I wonder? And that just leads you on a path of finding the full opera, or you've learned a new composer, or and I think that's important. I think it's always important to be bringing new stuff to people. But I think in terms of what you do, sort of all of this, you're able to create an interactive experience for people in terms of like, let's look at Schumann, let's look at Clara Schumann. That whole backstory is really what influences your playing of that music. Yeah. And so I think when people get a little bit of the story with the music, it helps them relate to it more. Because a tune can be beautiful and you can say, oh, I like that. I like listening to that. But when you really know more about the story of, at the time that a piece was written, I'm big on that. What else was going on in the world when this opera was written? Because I think we have a skewed vision of history. When things that were going on politically, or other things in culture that were going on, or what the fashion was, or were people writing at that time? Were people traveling? I love the context of that because it really helps you understand opera. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, this is just very old music. I'm like, some of it's not that old. Some of it's like a lot of the Schumann stuff is probably like 1844 or something. That's a generation and a half of a person. That's like your parents and their parents, maybe one more. But it's, when you think of it of lifetimes, it's not that long ago that was written. And so we're very connected to that time and that music. So I think there are little sound bites that you can feed to people that keep them coming back and they want to know more. And then they're able to digest the full operatic experience. Because it's a lot. It's a lot to take in the first time. And if you just, I worked with a guy once who did not like opera. And he said, it always sounds like, to me, it just sounds like a bunch of people drowning in the middle of the ocean. And I thought, okay, that's a fair assessment. Because that's really, if you didn't know opera, it just sounds like people bellowing. It's like a strange.
Because you also don't know the language.
And so it's a very strange art form. Yeah. So I think to get people interested in it, you just have to figure out like the back door entrance into like how to engage them. This is maybe not part of the thing, but in the town that I'm from, we had something called the Supas Dude Ranch, which is where people went and rode horses and whatever. So it was like there was a big hill and there was a big barn. And so a music promoter started something called Western Entertainment in 1983. So the event was called We in 83. And it was all country music artists. And what they did is brought in some headliners, like a Dolly Parton, and then they would have like new, younger country artists in. And it was over the course of a weekend. That festival is still going, and they have like 75,000 people that come to this thing now. It's massive. But it is, I loved going to that because people love the excitement of an audience with seeing performers doing the music they love. Mm-hmm. That's exciting. Yeah. And so that, I think, can transfer to all different genres of music. Yeah. I'm trying to think of, like I said, Pink, Kelly Clarkson. Those, I felt at those concerts the same way that I feel at an opera. When everything's really together and it's great, it's like elation. It's fantastic. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.